In the quiet years after Adam and Eve left the Garden of Eden, the world was still young and wide, like a field that had just been opened for the first time. Rivers moved slowly across the land, trees grew without fences, and the sky seemed closer to the earth than it does today. Adam worked the soil with hands that remembered the softness of Eden, and Eve raised her children with stories about walking with God in the cool of the day. Among those children were two sons, Cain and Abel. Cain was the firstborn, strong in body, serious in face, and used to responsibility. Abel came later, gentle in voice, thoughtful in his ways, and drawn to quiet places where animals rested. They shared the same parents, the same home, and the same memories of hardship outside the garden gates. Yet even in one house, hearts can grow in different directions. This story does not begin with murder. It begins with ordinary days, simple work, family meals, and two brothers trying to find their place in a broken world. It begins with love mixed with weakness, hope mixed with jealousy, and the slow, silent growth of a choice that would change human history forever. Cain chose the life of a farmer. Each morning he walked into the fields with tools made by his own hands, breaking hard soil that did not easily give fruit. He planted seeds, waited for rain, and fought weeds that rose like stubborn enemies. His work demanded patience and strength, and he believed that his labor gave him worth. Abel chose to care for sheep. He learned their sounds, their fears, and the way they followed a gentle voice. He walked with them across hills, protected them from wild animals, and carried the weak on his shoulders. Cain saw Abel's work as simple, even soft. Abel saw Cain's work as heavy and lonely. Still, they were brothers. They spoke at night by the fire. They shared bread made from their mother's hands. They laughed at small things and remembered childhood games. But inside Cain, a quiet fire was growing. He wanted to be seen as the most important son. He wanted approval that felt solid like the ground he worked. Abel did not try to compete, yet his peaceful spirit sometimes shone brighter than Cain's effort. The difference between them was not in their jobs alone. It was in how they carried their hearts before God. In those early days, people did not build temples of stone or sing in large gatherings. Worship was simple. It was done with open hands and honest hearts. Cain and Abel were taught that giving to God was not about payment but about trust. One day, the brothers decided to bring offerings to the Lord. Cain gathered fruits and grain from his fields. He chose what was easy to collect, what remained after he had taken his share. Abel chose the first and best of his flock, the strongest and healthiest animals. He did not see it as a loss, but as honor. The brothers stood apart, each holding his offering, waiting in silence. The wind moved gently through the trees. The earth seemed to hold its breath, and then God looked upon them. He accepted Abel's offering, seeing the faith behind it, the humble heart that trusted him completely. But Cain's offering was not accepted in the same way, not because farming was wrong, but because Cain's heart was closed and proud. In that moment, Cain felt something break inside him. He did not cry out. He did not speak, but his face fell, and darkness began to settle behind his eyes like a storm that refuses to leave. God did not turn away from Cain in anger. Instead, he spoke to him as a father speaks to a troubled child. God asked why his face was dark and why his heart was heavy. He warned Cain that sin was waiting like a wild animal at the door of his soul, ready to control him if he allowed it. God told him that he could still choose what was right, that he was not trapped by his feelings. Cain heard the words, but he did not welcome them. He felt judged, not guided. He felt small, not protected. His pride whispered that Abel had taken something from him. His pain told him that God was unfair. And so Cain said nothing. He returned to his fields, but his hands shook. The soil felt harder than before. The sky felt too wide, too empty. He watched Abel from a distance, seeing his brother not as family but as a mirror of his own failure. Every kind word from Abel sounded like mockery. Every peaceful step Abel took felt like an insult. Cain did not plan murder in one moment. It grew slowly, fed by silent anger and lonely thoughts. The warning from God echoed in his mind, but he pushed it away, choosing to listen to the louder voice of pride. Abel did not know what was happening inside his brother. He still spoke to Cain with respect. He still greeted him in the mornings. He still believed they would grow old together, teaching their own children how to live in this wide and difficult world. One day, Cain asked Abel to walk with him into the field. His voice was calm, but his heart was restless. The land stretched wide around them, empty and quiet, with no one to hear, no one to see. The wind moved slowly over the grass. Abel followed without fear. He trusted Cain, as younger brothers often do. They spoke about the weather, the crops, and the animals. But Cain's words were thin, hiding heavy thoughts beneath them. Then, in a moment that history would never forget, Cain rose against his brother. The Bible tells us simply that Cain killed Abel. It does not paint the moment with long detail because the pain of it needs no decoration. A life ended where trust had lived. Blood cried out from the ground, not with sound, but with truth. The first death among humans was not from sickness or age, but from betrayal, and it came not from a stranger, but from a brother. Silence filled the field after the act was done. The birds did not stop flying, and the sky did not fall, but something holy was broken. Cain stood alone where two brothers had once walked. The weight of what he had done pressed on him like heavy stone. He did not feel victory. He did not feel peace. He felt empty, like land after fire. God came to Cain again, not with thunder, but with a question. "Where is your brother Abel?" God asked. Cain answered with a lie shaped like a question. "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" With these words, Cain tried to hide from responsibility, but truth does not disappear when ignored. God told Cain that Abel's blood cried out from the ground. The land itself had become a witness. Cain would now live with the shadow of his choice. He would be separated from the soil he loved. He would wander, restless and afraid. Cain cried out, not in sorrow for Abel, but in fear for himself. He said his punishment was too great. God, even then, showed mercy. He placed a mark on Cain so that others would not kill him. Cain would live, but never again in peace. Abel's story ended in a field, but his voice did not disappear. His life became a lesson written into the memory of humanity. Through Abel, the world learned that goodness can be quiet, and faith can be gentle, but it is never weak. Through Cain, the world learned how anger, when hidden and fed, can grow into destruction. Adam and Eve mourned their son with tears that no words could hold. They had lost their home in Eden, and now they had lost a child to violence born in their own family. The pain of parents echoed across the land like a broken song. Eve remembered holding both sons as babies, feeling their small hearts beating against her own. Adam remembered teaching them to walk, to speak, to pray. Now one was gone, and the other was lost in guilt and distance. The earth itself seemed to carry their grief. This was not only the first murder, it was the first deep wound in the human family, a wound that would teach generations how close love and hatred can live beside each other. The story of Cain and Abel is not only about two brothers long ago. It is about the battle inside every human heart. It shows how jealousy begins as a quiet thought and grows when it is not faced with truth. Cain was not forced to become a killer. He was warned, he was given a choice. but he allowed pride to guide him instead of humility. Abel did not die because he was perfect, but because he was faithful in a world still learning what faith meant. Their story teaches that God looks not only at what we give, but at why we give it. He sees the hidden places, the silent reasons, the true motives that no human eye can measure. The field where Abel fell became a symbol. It reminds us that violence often grows in familiar places, where trust once lived. It warns that betrayal hurts deepest when it comes from those who know us best. And it asks each listener a quiet question. When anger rises in your heart, will you face it, or will you feed it until it becomes something you cannot control? Cain went away to the land of Nod, east of Eden, carrying his life like a heavy bag filled with regret and fear. He built a city, raised a family, and lived many years, but the mark on his life was deeper than any sign on his skin. He had learned how powerful his hands could be, but also how fragile trust is once broken. Abel, though gone, became a voice of righteousness spoken through generations. His name was remembered as one who honored God with a clean heart. In later times, people would speak of him as an example of faith, of simple obedience, of goodness that did not shout. His life was short, but its meaning was long. The earth that received his blood became a quiet witness to God's justice and sorrow. Every time people told this story, they were reminded that sin does not begin with action. It begins with a choice in the heart. And that choice, if left alone, can grow into something that cannot be undone. The camera of history slowly pulls back from that lonely field. We see the small figures of early humanity spreading across the land, building families, learning how to survive outside Eden. But the shadow of Cain and Abel follows them. It appears in stories of jealousy, in wars between brothers, in betrayals among friends, and in silent anger hidden behind polite faces. This story becomes a foundation, not of hope alone, but of warning. It tells us that evil does not always arrive like a storm. Sometimes it comes quietly, wearing familiar clothes, speaking in a trusted voice. It enters homes, families, and hearts, and only humility, truth, and honest repentance can stop it. God's question still echoes through time: where is your brother? It is a question about responsibility, about love, about how we treat those closest to us. Every generation must answer it again. In the quiet of the night, long after the field had grown grass again, Adam would sit and stare into the fire, seeing the faces of both sons in the flames. Eve would weep softly, remembering Abel's gentle voice and Cain's troubled eyes. Their home was never the same. Laughter came less often. Silence stayed longer. The family learned that sin does not only hurt the one who commits it or the one who suffers from it. It spreads outward, touching every heart nearby. Cain's act did not end in one moment of violence. It began a river of sorrow that flowed through his parents, his future children, and the world itself. Yet even in this dark story, God's mercy remained. Cain was not destroyed. Humanity was not abandoned. The door to repentance, though ignored by Cain, was never closed by God. This shows a truth that runs through all of Scripture. Justice is real, but mercy walks beside it. The offering that Cain brought was not wrong in its form, but empty in its spirit. Abel's offering was accepted because it was given with trust and love, not fear or pride. This detail matters. It tells us that God is not impressed by the size of our work or the noise of our actions. He listens to the quiet language of the heart. Cain wanted recognition without surrender. Abel surrendered without asking for recognition. This difference shaped their paths. The world today still struggles with the same battle. People work hard, give much, and speak loudly, but hide anger and jealousy inside. Others walk quietly, doing good without seeking praise. The story asks us to look inward, not outward. It asks what kind of offering we bring with our lives, one shaped by pride or one shaped by faith. Betrayal, as this story shows, does not always come from enemies. It often comes from those who share our blood, our homes, our secrets. Cain knew Abel's voice, his habits, his kindness. He knew how to invite him into the field without raising fear. That knowledge made the act heavier. The closest relationships carry the greatest power to heal and the greatest power to harm. This is why the story of Cain and Abel still speaks today. It teaches parents to watch not only their children's actions, but their hearts. It teaches brothers and sisters to speak openly before silence becomes poison. It teaches leaders to correct with love, not with pride. And it teaches every soul that anger ignored is like fire left alone in dry grass. When God spoke to Cain before the murder, he described sin as something that waits at the door, wanting to rule over him. This image is gentle, yet strong. It shows that evil is patient. It waits for the moment when the heart is tired, when pride is wounded, when anger feels justified. Cain could have turned back. He could have spoken his pain. He could have asked God for help, but he chose silence, and silence became agreement with darkness. Abel, unaware of the danger, walked into the field trusting love over fear. His death became a mirror, showing humanity how dangerous unspoken anger can be. After the murder, the ground was cursed for Cain. The soil he once loved would no longer respond to him the same way. His hands, once proud of their strength, would now shake with uncertainty. He became a wanderer, a man without roots. This was not only a punishment, but a picture. A heart that chooses hatred loses its home, even if it builds cities. It loses rest, even if it finds shelter. Cain would carry his memory wherever he went. Abel would be remembered wherever faith was spoken. In later generations, storytellers would speak of Abel as the first righteous one to die. They would say his blood spoke better things than revenge. It spoke of justice, of God's care for the innocent, of hope that goodness is not forgotten even when it is buried. Cain's name, however, became a warning, a symbol of what happens when a man refuses to face his own darkness. Together, the two brothers became signs placed at the beginning of human history, pointing in two directions, one toward humility and life, the other toward pride and loss. This story does not end with a celebration. It ends with a question that remains open in every generation. Will we be our brother's keeper? Will we guard the hearts of those near us, or will we compete with them? Will we speak when pain grows, or will we hide it until it becomes dangerous? Cain chose isolation. Abel chose faith. The difference between them was not talent or strength or intelligence. It was the direction of their hearts. The first family became the first lesson. From their joy and from their sorrow, the world learned that love must be protected, and anger must be faced early. Every home, every friendship, every community carries the same risk and the same hope. The field where Abel died is far behind us in time, but its message stands close to us still. It whispers that evil often begins quietly, but faith can also grow quietly, stronger than violence, deeper than hate. As the years passed, children were born, and humanity grew. Cities rose, songs were written, and tools were shaped from stone and metal. Yet the story of the two brothers remained. Parents told it to warn their sons. Mothers told it to teach their daughters about kindness and courage. It became part of the long memory of the human family, reminding everyone that the first spilled blood was not from war, but from wounded pride. The earth itself became a symbol in this story. It received Abel's blood, and it refused to hide it. God heard what the ground could not say with words. This teaches that no wrong is truly invisible. Even when people try to cover their actions, creation itself bears witness. Justice may move slowly, but it does not forget. Cain's question, "Am I my brother's keeper?" still echoes today in different forms. It is heard when people turn away from suffering. It is heard when neighbors ignore each other's pain. It is heard when jealousy is chosen over compassion. God's answer is written in the story itself. Yes, we are responsible for one another. Yes, love is a duty, not a weakness. Abel's life was short, but it was full of trust. Cain's life was long, but it was heavy with memory. This contrast is not about reward or punishment alone. It is about the kind of peace that lives inside a person. Abel died with clean hands. Cain lived with restless ones. One walked humbly, the other walked endlessly. Through this story, the Bible opens its long message about human choice. Before laws were written, before kings were crowned, before nations were formed, God showed humanity the power of a single decision, a choice to face sin, or a choice to welcome it, a choice to love, or a choice to destroy. Cain and Abel stand at the doorway of history like two signs. One points toward faith, patience, and quiet strength. The other points toward pride, anger, and lonely wandering. Every person who hears this story must choose which path to follow, not with words, but with the secret movements of the heart. And so the story ends where it began, in a simple field, under a wide sky, with two brothers whose lives became a lesson for the world. One voice was silenced, but its meaning grew louder with time. The other voice lived on, carrying the weight of a choice that could not be undone. Cain murdered Abel, and humanity learned its first painful truth. Betrayal often begins with the closest hand, and the deepest wounds are not always made by strangers, but by those who once walked beside us in trust.